Hello, welcome back. This is Pastor Adam Fannin, Law of Liberty Baptist Church here in Jacksonville, Florida. We've got an exciting topic today. We're going to be talking about the prophecies of the Third Temple. And this is very timely as the news is constantly feeding on this. Is there going to be a World War III? Is it going to happen in Jerusalem and Iran? And these are all topics at hand. And we're going to talk about Zionism. We're going to talk about the Third Temple, its location. We're going to talk about the indications of prophecy that would point to a temple. Was 1948 a fulfillment of prophecy, the relevance of the book of Revelation? A lot of different topics like that. Now, with me today, I have Pastor Tommy McMurtry, Liberty Baptist Church, Rock Falls, Illinois. Pastor McMurtry, if you would tell us a little bit about your church and some things going on in your world.
Yeah, so our church is Liberty Baptist Church in Rock Falls, Illinois. We've been here coming up on 13 years. Next month, we'll be celebrating 13 years. I am originally from LaSalle, Illinois, and was out of my dad's church. And then we started this church 13 years ago, so I'm the only pastor they've ever had. But the Lord's blessing, and we're a small soul-winning church, just trying to make a big impact in our area and anywhere in the world we can. And we have a very faithful bunch of people here at Liberty Baptist Church, and it is just a great pleasure to be able to pastor these people and have a church in this area. We're very thankful. I have 8 children and been married to Cassandra for 23 years, I believe it's been now. And so very blessed,
Well, praise the Lord. Hey, and I appreciate you being on today. We're going to talk about these topics of prophecy. Now, Pastor McMurtry has a secondary YouTube channel, and I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat there for everybody to see. And it's The Spirit of Prophecy. And let me just pull this up and share my screen so everybody can get a look here. And you've been doing some podcasts with a lot of different characters and people that believe different things. And this is relevant because bigger than just your podcast, which is pretty big, I hear a lot of people are talking about it. You're working on a fairly large project, a feature film, documentary style, I guess, about the temple. Brother, tell us about that for a second.
Yeah, so I'm very privileged to be working with Brother Paul Wittenberger on a documentary called Temple. He's been working on this documentary. I believe he started filming in 2020 and did a bunch of different interviews, but then it had to be put on hold for a while because of COVID. We needed to be able to go to Israel to do a lot of filming, and so that got put on hold for a few years because of all that. But we finally made it over there almost 2 years ago, and in reality, that trip changed a lot about where we were going with that documentary. We had an idea in our mind of what we were going to be showing, but we went over there and just kind of looked at the information, interviewed a lot of different people, and found out a lot of things weren't as we thought that they were. But a big part of what we were wanting to do the whole time was we wanted to talk about the actual location of the temple, and then the amount of information that we found out about on that was just absolutely fascinating. It's something I've been interested in for a very long time, and it was just a great adventure going over there, spending a lot of time just exploring the city, talking to a lot of interesting people, just seeing some amazing things that I didn't know about, and just continue to learn about that area. And it is a city that, of course, the world is interested in, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. A lot of archaeological digs are currently taking place there. I mean, we literally were watching them excavate an area where they're digging up all these things going back to Second Temple period stuff. And it's unbelievable the amount of things that are under your feet out there. And they have, even in the last 20 years, they have made some discoveries that in reality should have changed everything about what we have been saying about archaeology and history. But what we were fascinated with is the fact that in Judaism, tradition trumps everything. And we shouldn't have been surprised by that because Jesus dealt with the same thing in the New Testament. And And so we are in America, we're more about the evidence and the facts. In Judaism, they're more about tradition. And it's fascinating when you go over there as an American Christian, who are more about the facts, and we go over there and see facts, but it doesn't change their minds. It really is a fascinating thing. But a lot of Christians, they're afraid to admit these facts for fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. And so it's really sad to see all the reality that's being denied about what we see over there.
Now, we're simulcasting this on the Law of Liberty channel and also Spirit of Prophecy, and I can see comments on both sides. And I want to share a comment and just deal with this right away. Third temple is the Son of Man, not a building built with human hands. A lot of people will say, well, that third temple prophecy, the third temple is our body. I've said that, and I agree with that. But is there going to be a third temple built in Jerusalem physically for the next Messiah, the false Messiah, to stand in? Do you believe that?
Absolutely. And I do. I agree. The true temple that took away sins was the body of Jesus Christ, the one that they destroyed, and 3 days later he raised up again. That's the temple where sin was taken away, where the sacrifice, one-time sacrifice, was made that cleansed all sin. The other temples were only a picture of that one that was to come. And now, as believers, our body is the temple of God. And so God, we are able to have fellowship with God anywhere today because of what Jesus Christ did in the temple of his body. So the temple that we're talking about today, in reality, while we often refer to it as the third temple, the problem with that is the first two temples were ones that were sanctioned by God. This third temple will not be sanctioned by God. This will be an Antichrist temple. I believe that the temple that we're waiting for is the ultimate picture of rebellion against God. It will be the ultimate picture of just the world uniting in rebellion and rejection of Jesus Christ, the true temple. And that's what in the futurist world we believe is going to happen. We believe that there's going to be an Antichrist, another Christ, a false Messiah, and we believe that the world is going to follow him. And so what's that going to look like? Well, in a lot of the futurist world, they focused more of it on like this concept of a political leader, which I believe he will be one. But the reality is, if he's going to be a false Messiah, then there's going to be a lot of similarities to what the actual Messiah would be. And in the prophecies of the true Messiah, we do see things involving a temple that he was going to fulfill. And we see Jesus fulfilled those things when he came, but we also see him replacing that temple with the temple of his body. So the simple fact is, for there to be another Christ or a false Christ or a false Messiah, we've got to have a false temple. So when we talk about a third temple, nobody's speaking of this temple like the temple of the Old Testament, where we're speaking of it in a way that it's a false one, but it will be an imitation. It will probably look similar, just like there will be similarities between the false Messiah and the true Messiah. But at the end of the day, it's all bad. It's all bad. It's all evil, and it's all something we shouldn't support.
Now, I want to go ahead and pull this scripture up on screen here, because 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is probably one of the most powerful places that it would indicate. I believe there's cross references to this scripture in Revelation and Daniel and perhaps a few other places. Isaiah as well. I know you recently talked about that. But Pastor McMurtry, since you're the guest, I want you to lead us through this passage as you interpret it, starting with verse number 1, if you would.
Yes. So the Apostle Paul, very clear. Now I beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him. Now that, interestingly enough, that word gathering is the same word Jesus used in Matthew chapter 24 when it talks about gathering together as elect. People like to get away from biblical terms, usually because their position is unbiblical. I believe Matthew 24 is referring to the rapture, for lack of a better term, and it used the term gathering. So that's clearly what he's talking about here. Matthew 24 also calls it the coming of our Lord. And so verse 2 that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit nor by word, as by letter as from us, is that the day of Christ is at hand. Now, many people ask, why would Christians be troubled that the day of Christ is at hand? Well, they did have a different mentality back then that we do today, and that is they wanted to be ready at Christ's return spiritually. They wanted to be found serving him, doing good works. And today we have more of an escapist mentality that we want him to come just so we don't have to worry about paying next month's bills. And that wasn't the mentality back then. These people really, really cared. They wanted to be found blameless. They wanted to be pure. So I believe that's why they were troubled. But he said, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. So Paul's just making it clear, hey, there's certain prophecies that are going to take place before the coming of the Lord, before our gathering together. And he said there's going to be a falling away first. Now, typically in the Baptist world, the falling away is whatever new movement is, or whatever new manifestation of apostasy is going on. This is the falling away. People are getting away from the King James Bible. That's the falling away. They're going liberal. That's the falling away. Well, I get that it is a falling away, but if we're going to talk about the falling away as a specific event based on the words of Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2, maybe we should look at how Paul talked about this falling away. And he said, they're going to become a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, notice how he said, let no man deceive you. Matthew 24, Jesus also started off by saying, let no man deceive you by any, or he said something about not being deceived. Right. And he talks about Antichrist. We are not to be deceived by Antichrist. He warned of false messiahs. That's what we're not supposed to be deceived by. So when I see the Bible talking about a falling away, okay, again, any apostasy, you could say, is a falling away. But if we're going to talk about the falling away like Paul did, I would say it's people accepting the Antichrist as the Messiah. And so without a doubt, I believe the falling away is when we see the world uniting around this man of sin who is declaring himself to be God. And it says he's doing it in the temple of God. Now, there's all kinds of ways people try to put that in the first century. And I have read historical things where we see attempts, I believe, at this taking place, but we never see it fully manifested. I do believe Satan tried to make it happen. This never successfully happened. It kind of came close in some ways, but it never fully happened. And interestingly enough, eventually I'm going to get around to doing a podcast on this, but you can go back and you can read Irenaeus in the 2nd century. And this is after the temple is destroyed. And Irenaeus in the 2nd century is talking about a future temple where the Antichrist is going to go in and declare himself to be God. So you would think these people, 60, 70 years later would have known if that event would have taken place. I can see where some things can get lost in history 2,000 years later, but people in that general area, less than 100 years later, they already had forgotten about that. I kind of doubt that. I think because it never happened.
Irenaeus actually would have held what is called a historic premillennial position. Mm-hmm. He actually talked about the 42 months of tribulation that would come prior to the arrival of Christ. And he believed in a literal kingdom on earth of the Lord Jesus Christ, which this is important because what's happened throughout history is as the pagans, the Catholics started systematizing things and outlawing certain versions of the Bible and hijacking Christianity, they tried to set the standard or the conversation, if you will. And so they were getting away and they said, well, that's all symbolic or that's all spiritual. Later, even today, I believe the Catholic Church holds the view that the Antichrist was pagan Rome before she became, the church, if you will. And a lot of the Protestants, which most of your mainline Protestant denominations, They are not the same as the true biblical Christians, those that opposed Rome all along. But most of your Protestants would say, well, it still is Rome, and they systematize it, spiritualize it. It's all symbolic, and they will thereby ignore the literal millennial reign of Christ and the tribulation that's to come and a literal antichrist. So that's why today there's a lot of prophecy that where people are all messed up, preterism, amillennialism, postmillennialism, and many other flavors and even, some of the premillennialism is messed up. Pre-tribulation rapture is a major problem, a newly invented doctrine that is packaged with this concept of Zionism, that they want to restore the area. And it's a new religion with new people and a new tongue, but they're claiming to be the old religion from the Old Testament with that old covenant. And it's very confusing to most Christians. Most Christians, even pastors, sometimes just cannot discern the difference between, is it an ethnicity? Is it a nation? Is it a political movement? What are we dealing with here? What's one of the best ways? How do you try to, when somebody says, well, like all Israel shall be saved? I know it's kind of off topic from the temple, but what's a quick answer you would give somebody when they're locked into that Zionistic Christian view?
Right. Well, when people bring up and so all Israel shall be saved, I always point out it's just saying in this manner shall all Israel be saved. That's what it's saying. It's not saying it basically, to sum it all up, Romans 1 through 11 is explaining all the nuts and bolts of salvation. And so we often think of chapters 1 through 8 as being that, but when we get to chapters 9, 10, and 11, he's shifting the focus in Israel too, and showing how they're not excluded from these covenants and promises. These things were made for them. And so when he gets into chapter 11, and he's basically summing it all up, and he says, and so all Israel shall be saved. He's clearly saying that in this manner, it's going to be a salvation that is without works. It is going to be a salvation that is eternal. It is going to be a salvation that is based on faith in Jesus Christ. That's what he's saying right there.
The deliverer, right?
And so
it mentions the deliverer. That's the Lord Jesus Christ. We're all going to be saved through him.
Exactly. Right? It's all going to be through Jesus Christ. And so that's basically, what the and so all Israel shall be saved is all about.
So then here in 2 Thessalonians 2, when it talks about the temple of God, okay, we know it's not saying that's having the devil in your heart, right? This is a literal temple that will be built, I believe, according to the pattern of what God gave, according to what the world thinks are the people of God. So they will call it the temple of God. But the goal of this rebuilding is so that Satan himself, or the Antichrist, this man of sin, this son of perdition, can sit in the temple of God saying that he is God, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, people get a little confused when they see temple of God. When they see that, they think, oh, well, that doesn't make sense because the next temple wouldn't be the temple of God. Because obviously, as Christians, we understand there's no need for another temple. But it also, he's also not going to be God. He's going to claim to be God. This has been Satan's goal from the beginning, when he said in Isaiah 14, for thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Now, interestingly enough about Satan, he doesn't mind. He's not interested in exalting the name of Satan. He just wants to take on the name of God. That's what he's all about. He wants to be God, and he wants to be seen as Christ. He doesn't mind stealing his name. He just wants people to to identify him as God. He wants them to identify him as the Messiah, even though it's completely false and completely fake. And so, when it has always been his goal. I believe he wants to sit on the throne in heaven. That's when he says, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. But he also wants to sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. That literally is speaking about the temple in Jerusalem. That is the mount of congregation in the sides of the north. That was the location of the temple in Jerusalem during that time. People get tripped up on that because the geography has completely changed in the last 2,700 years since Isaiah was written. And it's not the city of David area is not on the sides of the north of Jerusalem anymore, but it was back then. And I don't know if we want to, if we can do a screen share, and I can show you too.
Yeah.
And let me show you something from Google Earth about that. So right here is what everybody recognizes. When everybody thinks about Jerusalem and you think about the sides of the north, well, then you would have it up in this area somewhere. But all of this stuff that you see here, I mean, this is all so new, what you can actually see. Now, over here on the west is where you have the Wailing Wall. But what you're seeing there actually dates back to, around the Roman period. A lot of that was probably built by Herod the Great. Well, that's still 700 years after Isaiah was written. So this whole area where the Romans built their fort, which is what this was, Fort Antonia, this came hundreds of years after Isaiah. This area over in here, they will tell you today, Eli Shukran, who we interviewed for the documentary, he is the main guy that's kind of explored this area here. And he will tell you that this is where the Gihon Springs is. They found this in the late 1800s. It had been hidden for centuries. And he will tell you this is where Jerusalem started, over in this area. They're going to always start these cities close to a water source. They found areas where they used to do sacrifices. They call it the altar of Melchizedek. It's kind of hard. I'm not exactly sure the spot, but it's somewhere in this area here. And this area here is known as the city of David, where the Bible tells us that the temple was built on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. David was the one that took Jebus, or Jerusalem. And so this was the area that was originally settled, and the temple was probably somewhere in this area. In fact, this area right in here, they are currently excavating this area. We're watching them excavate this. All this stuff you're seeing down here, it's several feet below the road here. It's all been dug up. They'll tell you that Second Temple period. They have found mikvahs in these areas where they do their ritual washings and things that would be associated with the temple. There's no way the priests were doing their washings in here and then walking all the way uphill over to this area. No, they would have done all this in close proximity to the temple. And so when you point out all these things, they will tell you this area in here is where Solomon was anointed to be king. They'll tell you all this stuff, but then when you ask the simple question, well, then wouldn't that be where the temple was? Then all of a sudden it's like, nope, let's go on to the next thing. And it's because that goes against tradition. But this area here,
brother, if I can ask you real quick. So do they have to remove the mosque to build their temple? If they had permission and they started building tomorrow, could the mosque still stand? Or in your opinion, do you think that has to be leveled before they can just really build what they want?
I always believed, up until recently, that the mosque would come down. I always thought, you know what? There's been so much tradition surrounding that Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and all that kind of stuff. I always thought, no, it's going to come down. That's where they're going to want to build the temple. Until I finally realized, no, Satan said, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. He saw for almost 500 years, Solomon's temple stood in that spot, and almost another 500 years that the Zerubbabel's temple stood in that spot. For 1,000 years, he watched, them worship, and that was the area he wanted to go. That was the place of God. Jesus Christ is going to rule from Mount Zion. So he's not going to want to go to this other spot. I don't think he's going to care about that. I personally think that the temple is going to be built in that area. Now, that's a shocking thing for a lot of people, and because of the fact that tradition is so strong. But at the same time, something I did not know about until recently. I didn't know about this until I was watching what Paul had put together for this movie. I'm telling you, everybody's going to want to watch A City Lost. Temple, A City Lost. It's going to be very informative. But it was that whole city of David area that I was showing you. The Rothschilds purchased that in the late 1800s. They purchased that whole area, and they, that family or whatever still owns that particular area. And they started excavating there because they thought they would find the Ark of the Covenant in that area. Now, that brings up the question, why would they think the Ark of the Covenant would be in that area? Now, because a lot of the Jews today, a lot of their legends are saying that the Ark of the Covenant is in some of these catacombs and areas underneath the Dome of the Rock. And there are some, if you ever get a chance to go to Israel and take the Wailing Wall tunnels tours, it's awesome. Okay. I believe you're being fed a ton of baloney on that. In fact, another thing you'll see in the documentary, I hope I'm not doing spoilers or anything. I think Brother Paul will be okay with me talking about this. But if you go on those Western Wall tunnels, they have a carving in the wall, a Roman inscription. I forgot what it says exactly, but basically showing that was where they housed troops during that time. I mean, it's carved right there in the wall. I forgot what it said exactly, but there's all kinds of cool things down there for sure. But this area over here in the city of David, right there's a good shot of the city of David. A lot of that stuff is very unexplored, and the amount of things that they are finding underneath there is astounding. And what I kind of hope is going to happen, what I kind of think could happen, is if they did discover the Ark of the Covenant down there, if they ever find the Ark of the Covenant in that area, that would be something that I think would excite the world so much. It would excite the Jewish community so much that I think that would be such a big deal that they would be able to change their beliefs on where the location was and still kind of save face. Because right now, if they're just like, yeah, you know what, it's in the city of David, then it's like, well, wait a minute, why have we been fighting so much for the last 1,000 years? Why have you all been, because they're going to have to admit they've been praying to a Roman fortress for a long time, going and banging their heads against the wall over there. But I think finding the Ark of the Covenant would be so big. It would be so interesting. It would excite the world so much that I think everybody would just forget about all that. And that might be the thing it would take to get them to rebuild the temple. So I mean, they might do it over there, but I think it's going to be in the right spot.
I have a theory on that too, because we know that Satan wants to use an ecumenical movement, right? Get the doctrine out, everybody together. We all serve the same God, Jews, Muslims, Catholics, etc. Right? And so I think with that deception, some people may know that the Muslims are waiting on their fifth imam. I've also seen indications that the House of Saud, where Saudi Arabia comes from, were tied to Judaism. And, I believe that when this false Messiah shows up, that, he's the Maitreya, the Mishnah, the fifth imam. There's even Taoism is waiting on an ascended master to arrive and bring everybody together. So I wouldn't be surprised if this would be the thing where even the Muslims said, this is our next prophet, right? This is the one that puts it all together. I really believe that. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they kept the temple there and they said, look, we can dwell together because we all serve this same Messiah, this Christ. Now, in Talmudism, the Babylonian Talmud is the foundation for Judaism today. It is not the Bible. People need to understand the difference. And in the Babylonian Talmud, they are awaiting two different messiahs, if you will. Ben Joseph as a spiritual prophet, Ben David as the king, the son of David. And so what's interesting is in the book of Revelation, it tells us specifically you're going to have like that Antichrist king and his religious prophet, the false prophet as well. So there's, Judaism will fall in line with exactly what the Bible is warning us about the Antichrist. Now, when somebody says 1948, that's a fulfillment of prophecy. Those are God's people. What do you think?
Well, first thing I would say was which prophecy, because if they want to say the budding of the fig tree in Matthew 24, then I'm going to laugh at them, because that's not what that is at all. Now, if they want to talk about like, Revelation 13 and the rise of the beast and things like that. Obviously, I don't think that was fulfilled in 1948, but I definitely think that was a major step in that direction. So I would agree with a lot of my dispensational Zionistic brothers that 1948 was a fulfillment of prophecy. I just wouldn't agree on which prophecy, and that it is a very bad thing, that this is ultimately the world getting a little bit closer to, accepting Antichrist. Because in order for there to be an Antichrist system, we have to restore the temple. We have to have something that we have to have a religion that involves a temple, involves a Messiah. You got to have a man as a Messiah. So they need to have certain of these things in place. And I believe that we are getting closer towards that. And so I find it very troubling that Christians are so supportive of this, that they get excited like this is God doing a work. No, this is God allowing Satan to do a work. I do believe, and I'm telling you, that is why we have so many examples in history where we see things that are very similar, especially in the first century, because of the fact that Satan has been trying to make this happen for a long time. I think Satan has been trying to set in the temple of God since at least Isaiah 14, probably even before that. But for he's been trying that. And so historically, we can see many times where he got really close, but there's always somebody withstanding him. There's always something withholding him. He is being let, as is spoken of in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. But since the destruction of the temple, that I believe God wanted that to happen, we have not seen any major attempt, because he can't do these things without a temple. And I believe that God wanted the gospel going to all the world. God wanted God's, he's been given us this period of time for the gospel to spread and for more people to be saved. And so the removing of that temple, it was a very, very good thing for the world. And it was a very, very good thing for Christianity. And in reality, it was a good thing for the Jews. It took away a huge distraction from them. But I believe Satan has always wanted to rebuild it, but he has not been allowed that opportunity. And so again, it's my opinion that it will be on the in the city of David where it will be built, but I think it very well could be in the on the Temple Mount. I think it's even possible too, they could build it right next to the Dome of the Rock, and a lot of people would think that that's wonderful. But the problem that we've always had historically is we have always interpreted prophecy in some way in light of our current situation, because we want these things to happen in our day. And if it were to happen in our day, we know it's very likely that it would look this way. But another possibility that I think, we don't really like to consider, just because of the fact that we want all these things to happen soon, is that, the secularization of everything. While you do have a lot of your Muslims who are very violent and are ready to fight to the death and all that kind of stuff, you've got a lot that just don't really care that much. The thing that was most shocking to us when we went to Jerusalem on this trip is when we found out how few Jews really care about the rebuilding of the temple. They don't care that much. Now, there is a segment of Jews who care very much about that. There are some Jews who care very much about what I would say is the fake Temple Mount, and nothing is going to change their mind on it, except maybe finding the Ark of the Covenant. But even then, I don't know for sure. But let's just say it's another 100 years. I think that's going to change. I think we'll see more and more of them get secularized. And as time goes on, the way things are trending, I do think if the powers that be were to just come along and say, yeah, we're just going to rebuild the temple in the city of David, I think a ton of Jews would be okay with that. And so one of the things that's fascinating to see right now with all the rise in anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff in America, most of your Jews are Democrats, and they are non-Zionist. Republicans are way more Zionist than Democrats are, even though most Democrats are, still are supportive of Zionism because of APAC. Don't get me going on that.
Oh man.
At the same time, actual Jews in America, they hate all this Zionist stuff because, for one, they don't care about the religious aspect of it. They don't care about the traditions, and it just makes people hate Jews. So it actually causes problems for them whenever the Zionist stuff is being pushed forward. And the only ones that care about that are Zionist Jews like Netanyahu and Zionist Christians. And it really is a shame that there is such a thing as Zionist Christians. It
Well,
really is.
it's almost an oxymoron in my opinion, because Zionism is it's a system to establish a nation without the right covenant for the
Mhm.
Antichrist. That's the wrong Christ. For a temple, it's the wrong temple, and people are deceived. I mean, I really despise Christian Zionism. Not my brothers that are wrong. There are
Mhm.
people that are saved that have the wrong view politically. They watch Fox News and they're so worried about what's going to happen in earthly Jerusalem. They forget that heavenly Jerusalem is the mother of us all. They forget
Mhm.
that Abraham, he was searching for a city whose builder and maker was God, that he saw the promises afar off, but he did not obtain the promises. He didn't get the promised land. Yes, he was on the dirt, but it's not called Holy Land until the Lord is there. Just as the burning bush, the Lord is there, and that's what makes a huge difference. Now, there is a difference between Zionism, Semitism, and Judaism. And I want to talk about
Mhm.
this for a second, because Semitism, or a Semite, would be the descendants of Shem. If you
Mhm.
look on Webster's, it actually defines Semitism as a preference for Semites over others. Almost like you can be I know anti-Semitism. If you say, I don't support the war in Israel, they say, oh, you're a racist, right? They say you're an anti-Semite. But truly, to be a Semite would also mean it's like a reversed racism thing, where
Mhm.
they prefer themselves. And, if I said, hey, I'm an Aryan and I think that makes me better, you'd say, whoa, look out. We've heard this one before. But that's exactly what's happening within Israel today. Now, I want you to deal first, if you will, with the ethnicity. Because today, if I wanted to convert, I could study Judaism for 2 years, the religion, and
Mhm.
convert, and I can move to Israel and they would give me property. Does that make me an Israelite? Does it make me a Semite? Does it make me a Zionist? So, are there today, do you believe there are truly ethnic Hebrews or Jews? What's your opinion on that terminology?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there are some true ethnic Jews. The problem is I don't know who they are. I don't know how they can prove it. I do know too that you do over in Israel, a lot of your people that I would say are probably more likely to be the ethnic Jews. They're a little darker skinned. Typically, they're not very religious, and they're not Zionist at all. A lot, you have your Orthodox Jews that are typically whiter than I am, and but but then too, you also have your oh, I don't know what you would call these people exactly, but you have uh the kibbutzes that are out there that are real popular. Now, these are like, and it was so funny. I heard somebody in the news the other day use this term, and it's this way I've always explained them. You have like your hippie Jews. Okay. Now who are these hippie Jews? Well, pretty much anybody, if they will sign on to certain things, they will let you be a Jew and you can go over there because they need people settling that area. Because the more people they get in that area, the more control they have, the easier it is for them to claim certain things. You hear a lot of these illegal settlements that they have going on that are illegal according to international law. Okay, I don't know all the details of what makes them legal or illegal. The reality is, though, the more people they can get over there, the harder it's going to be for the international community to say, you got to get rid of them. Well, look, they build houses. We can't just displace all these people. Now we've got a humanitarian crisis. But a lot of those people, they're literally literally like hippies that they've just decided we're Jews. and we're going to go over and we're going to live in these kibbutzes and we're going to live off the land. And let me just tell you something. Here's the dirty little secret. The Zionist Jews, they don't even care about them. They don't see them. I think they know they're not ethnic Jews, but they're just kind of useful pawns for them because they need Jews over there. And most Jews don't want to go there. They're just not interested. They're happy wherever they're at in different parts of the world. And so historically, there are a lot of the persecutions that have risen in different places. It has been, the Jews have been behind it in order to make them uncomfortable so they will go settle in Israel. And so the thing is too, and I hate to bring this up, but on October 7th, nobody can figure out why it took Israel so long to respond. I think we know why. It's because they needed this to happen. I do believe the Arabs did it. I believe that the Hamas did these things, but I believe they allowed it to happen. You know what? A lot of it was at this music festival. These were like Jewish hippies.
Very much so.
We think of Jews in Israel, we're always thinking about the people at the Wailing Wall. We're thinking about those religious ones. That is a completely different group. The people that live out in the kibbutzes and things, they're very different. And the Jews, they don't care about them. So, the variety of Jews it's a very complicated thing. And there are think about it
there's
this
a
way.
spectrum, right?
Right.
Because they actually had their liberal reform in society, and it's a big part of who they are. In fact, Netanyahu, when he came to America, wasn't he praising, the false women's rights movement and the sodomites and, praising the things that just makes America look bad, but he knows how to pull the heartstrings. And you already have the right side because they think when they bless Israel, they're blessing God, and that's not true. And so what do they want to do? They want to get the liberal Democrat. They want those warmongers on their side also.
Right. Yeah. And so Benjamin Netanyahu, he is a great representative of Zionist Jews. He's not that religious. He doesn't even wear a yarmulke and cover his head or any of that stuff. So he's a Zionist Jew. But then you have like your Orthodox Jews. These are the ones that you see in there praying at the Wailing Wall and doing that thing all the time. And they do it because they mean it. They're not like the politicians that go there and visit just to get their picture taken and stuff like that. And now most of your Orthodox Jews, they don't care about the rebuilding of the temple. They believe it's just going to happen when the Messiah comes. A lot of them are not Zionist. They do not believe in killing people to get the land. To them, that is violating one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. So they're against that kind of thing. And then you have like your secular Jews. That is what Tel Aviv is full of. They hate Netanyahu. Listen, if it wasn't for the war going on right now, Netanyahu would not be the prime minister of Israel. He was about October 7th was the best thing that could have happened for Netanyahu. It made it where he's been able to hang on to power. They were already trying to get rid of him. They were about to get rid of him. So like when you go into these modern cities throughout Israel that are very modern, most of these people are Jews too. They don't give a rip about Zionism. They don't even mind the Palestinians that much as long as they're not trying to blow them up, but they're that's where all the sodomites are. That's where they are. They're very secular and they're a completely different breed and they don't support Netanyahu. So my question too, when people are always like, I stand with Israel. Well, which one? That's like saying,
right.
well, because I love America, and I'm from Canada, I stand with the Democrats. But wait a minute, half this country is against that agenda and isn't for that. We think that's bad for America. You're not supporting America. Well, a good chunk of Israel, when you're supporting Netanyahu, they see that as bad for their country. And they don't want him there. And he is basically a dictator, just desperately hanging on to power. And he will have no problem sacrificing a lot of his own people to stay in power. He has done that. He will continue to do that. You just had these other Jews that were killed. I forgot what they were called exactly, but they were like Arabic Jews, where a bunch of them got killed, and of course, Israel's freaking out about it. They don't care. They're
Well,
using it as excuse to go kill thousands of Palestinians.
so I believe that mystery Babylon that we see in the book of Revelation is referring to end times earthly Jerusalem. I believe it's the old Jerusalem under a false covenant. It tells us that a woman rides the beast, and that woman is Jerusalem, and the beast is the Antichrist. And as you look at all the descriptions, there are certain things that could have only happened in Jerusalem. That's one of the major reasons I believe that. Peter called Jerusalem Babylon. There's many indicators for it. But when you get to chapter 18, and I'll be preaching that this Wednesday in my Revelation series, it talks about how the Antichrist established his 10 kings. And with those 10 kings, it said that they hated the whore and they burned the whore. And so my interpretation is the Antichrist and his government, his world order, will use the people of Jerusalem, of every ethnicity and religion, first to establish him as the king, the Messiah. Then he will cause a war, and he doesn't care for the fact he will destroy them. He will hurt them. He does not love them. And listen, if you're a Bible believing Christian, you need to, instead of just saying we need to turn Gaza into a parking lot and hurry up and nuke Iran, we need to be praying that the souls would be saved on both sides of this. All right. We need to see Israelites return, figure out that Jesus Christ is the one true Messiah, and that the Muslims would see he's not just a great prophet, he is the Son of God. And that ought to be our agenda.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is nothing for the Jews in Jerusalem, nor is there anything for the Muslims in Jerusalem. They in Hebrews, it calls them to follow him talking about Christ without the camp, bearing his reproach. Leave those things of the temple behind. They're not necessary. What took place, what was done to take care of sins, it happened outside that eastern gate, across the valley, right there, I believe, somewhere in the Silwan village. Jesus Christ was sacrificed on a cross, and we don't need to worship in that mountain. There was no need for Jerusalem. And again, to listen to Christians, just I know of Baptist preachers who literally, they go to places like Ukraine and they go preach to Jews to return to the land. There are Baptist preachers encouraging Jews to return to Israel. And that again, that's what they're doing. That is the campaign. And just like what we have going on with the immigration in this country, a lot of these people who are coming into this country are getting paid to come into this country. They're trying to change the demographics of this nation because they want to change the politics of this nation. That's just a reality. Okay. Now you get called racist and all kinds of names for even saying things like that, but that's absolutely what is happening right now. Why would you pay somebody to come to this country to go on the welfare system? Because they are trying to change the demographics, the politics, and everything in this country. That's exactly what they're doing in Israel. They're not reproducing children fast enough. They need people moving to that area, moving into these houses, settling these places. And the more they do, and then, the more they can kind of slowly take over these Palestinian territories. And so basically what happened originally with Zionism, the Jews legally bought up a bunch of that land, and then they successfully irrigated it. They made it flourish. They made the land valuable. And yes, a lot of the Arabs are upset. They feel like they got cheated. Well, that's what happens when you don't take care of the land. You can't just, say we claim all this while you're doing nothing with it. And so they did. And so they've got these places to where they're building houses and things, but you got to have people inhabiting them. So the more Jews that are moving over there, but those are the only people they're going to let in. They're only going to let in Jews. They're not going to do like America is doing.
And so,
but we let anybody.
Clarify that statement, because biblical Israel is definitely different than national Israel, common day national Israel. The Jews of today, or the religion of Judaism, you would also agree is totally different from the Judaism of the Old Testament. Is that right?
Oh yeah, 100% different. In fact, because the thing that we forget, somewhere along the line, somebody got the idea that genetics somehow has to do with being of Israel. That was never the case in the Bible. Well, it's like, well, they're Abraham's seed. Well, so was Ishmael. So was Esau. Okay, so no, it was never about genetics. It was about being in the covenant. It was, and part of being in the covenant is following certain commands. It's following certain laws, and it was never just a genetic thing. And so the reality is, Israel, the one who received the inheritance, he commanded his children to follow Shiloh when he came. He didn't do it. Israel, they were under the law of Moses. Moses called on them to follow that prophet like unto him, that was Jesus Christ, when he came. So whenever those people rejected Jesus Christ, they broke the covenant. They were cut off from the people. And so the reality is, what ended up happening after the first century, biblically speaking, legally speaking, is we have a whole new religion that got started. And it was one that was prophesied that would come. And it was known as, in the biblical term, is Antichrist. And we see in 1 John where he said, we know that Antichrist shall come. Even now, are there many Antichrists there? So we know it's the last time. Why? Because Antichrist had come. And that was what, if you want to call it Judaism and all, well, let's call it apostate Judaism. When you go, if you're a Baptist and then you forsake everything that Baptists teach, you're no longer a Baptist. And whatever it is that you morphed into, that's a new thing. When Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah and they continued another practice, that was not them continuing being Jews. That was them starting a new religion. And so Christianity is older than modern day Judaism, and that's why I like to. I think if you want to clarify what it is, well, it's Babylonian Talmudic Judaism, if you want to call it that at all. And so, because people don't understand how covenants work, they don't understand how things work legally, they are mistakenly associating the modern nation of Israel. They are connecting it with the Israel of the Old Testament, and that's wrong. And one of the reasons too, Christians are supporting the massacring of the Palestinians is because to them, it's Israel just defeating Amalek, wiping out Amalek. That's why they call it Amalek.
The Philistines are coming. The Philistines are coming.
No, they are not. They are not Amalek. The curses on Amalek do not apply to these people. The prophecies against Edom, those things were fulfilled during the time of the Babylonians. Isaiah prophesied about those things and the judgment that was going to come on them. Those things already happened. Those people got what was coming to them. And under the new covenant, those curses and things, they're not a thing anymore. A new nation was started, a new covenant was brought in, and you're blessed if you're with Christ, and you're saved, and you're cursed if you're not. And we have no command under this new covenant to go and possess a nation militarily, defeat our, kill our religious enemies and things like that. That is not Christian at all. And
blessed be the peacemakers.
Yes. And what they are doing is not Judaism like it was in the Old Testament. It absolutely isn't the same. In fact, Christianity is what Judaism was supposed to turn into, because they were supposed to do everything that prophet like unto Moses said. And so if Jesus said things like, blessed are the peacemakers, if Jesus told us to, get away from possessing these lands and all that kind of stuff and to follow Christ without the camp, then that is, in reality, we are the true Judaism. We are the reformed Judaism. If we want to get real biblical and technical terms, we're Reformed Judaism.
or fulfilled. We've
Right.
fulfilled these promises by receiving the Christ that came. And he didn't just come. God is not a racist. He's not a respecter of persons. And the benefit that Israel had, what's the advantage? Well, that they had the oracles of God. They had the word of God. They had the promise of
Mhm.
salvation. And they, as a missionary nation, were commanded to take it to other nations, and they failed. The scribes and the Pharisees hijacked biblical Judaism. They were trying to get people to establish it by works. Here in Romans 9, it says, they are not all Israel, which are of Israel. Why? He says, that is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God. We are
Mhm.
the children of the promise. We have received the promise. Now we have the same covenant, but it's a better covenant with better promises. It speaks better things than Abel. This covenant and these promises of salvation by faith in the Son of God have always existed. Adam knew it. He walked with God and saw God, lived 900 plus years. He was a witness of it. And his son, Abel, received that promise also. And he was the first one to go to heaven. And we're going to be resurrected at the same time as him, and that is not the pre-trib rapture, as is tied together with Zionism, unfortunately. There are a lot of people in Reformed theology, Calvinism, that don't have the Zionistic problem, but many of them have a gospel problem where they believe that God picks them to be saved, and anybody that dies early, God picked to go to hell. And so generally speaking, Christianity is very confused. You go to the dispensational crowd, and they're messed up on end times, some even saying that Israel can be saved today by works. You go to the other side in the Reformed theology, and their salvation doctrine is messed up, but at least they see end times theology a little bit better. But many of those end up being post tribulation, or or I'm sorry, post millennial or millennial.
Mhm.
Now, what's wrong? Where's the error? What's the warning you would give somebody that's moving toward millennialism? I know it's not a salvation issue, but what would you give as a warning to those?
Right. Well, I do think I kind of understand why people are moving that way because, as you mentioned before, a lot of what's being taught in premillennialism is just foolish and it's very Israel centered. They make everything all about Israel, and unfortunately, most of your defenders of premillennialism that are out there are spewing a bunch of nonsense about Israel. And so the reason people get messed up on all these things, it's because it's not that we don't, you know, we're always straw manning the other side and saying they don't believe God's going to keep his promise. No, the question is, how is he going to keep his promise? And so, um, where a lot of your premillennial crowd has gone wrong is they have, they've answered the question of why a millennium with, well, it's all Israel, 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 Israel. And that's just technically wrong. Where so the amillennial, I think again, I think they've swung the pendulum too far in the other direction. A lot of times we respond to some kind of false teaching by going so far the other direction, we go into another false teaching. And so I think what amillennialists are doing is they're failing to um, follow the consistency that we see with prophecies in the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we see God declaring things as so before they come to a physical fruition. Like when he told Abraham, I have made thee a father of many nations. Therefore, Abraham was a father of many nations. Well, I mean, yeah, God made him one, but he also still didn't have any children yet, and he hadn't even become a nation himself so much. He had just been declared one by God. But what ended up happening long term? Well, he literally became a father of many nations. And that was physically fulfilled through Jesus Christ. And so um I believe when it comes to premillennialism, uh um or amillennialism, is we have tried to help God's prophecies come to pass by changing what they are. We're kind of doing the same thing that Sarah did. God gave this prophecy about Abraham having a child, but it can't come through her. So what does she do? She tells Abraham, well, go have a child with Hagar. Well, no,
Hmm.
God's going to do this, and he's going to do it through Sarah. And so, we, as time has gone on and things have not happened in our time like we would like to see it happen, we've tried to help God out, and we've tried to help make his prophecy come true. And we've gotten away from the literal, and we've gone with the figurative. And it's like, no, God doesn't need our help in making his prophecies come to pass. They're going to come to pass like he said. And you just can't get away from the clear, very specific language that we see in relation to these prophecies. I believe Jesus is going to rule from Zion with a rod of iron. I believe that he is going to
Yes.
be victorious over his enemies. And I believe we are going to rule and reign with him. And I'm sorry, but when we're on this earth being persecuted, when we're seen as the filth of this world, that's not the fulfillment of that. We are going to have our day. Abraham is going to have his day. He is going to receive that land that he was promised. And I don't believe it's just some spiritual thing or just some heavenly thing. No, I believe it's something that we're going to experience here on this earth. And so in the amillennial world, they are very good at teaching a lot of spiritual truths that absolutely apply to today. But where I believe they go wrong is when they reject a literal physical fulfillment of those things in the future. That's just not consistent with the way prophecy has been fulfilled throughout the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we would see an immediate present spiritual fulfillment, but we always saw a physical, literal fulfillment in the future. And I think we should still keep holding out for that.
Yeah, multiple layers. Now, Fox News, I believe, has a big effect on Christianity, especially those that are veterans. And look, I don't have a problem with vets. I love vets, and we need a strong military to protect ourselves from the enemies we're making by bombing other countries. Blessed be the peacemakers. Now, here's the problem. Fox News pushes this dominionism, this kingdom theology. It's a post-millennial view that we have to bring in the kingdom by sword. Post-millennialism and replacement theology kind of go hand in hand, although there are a lot of people moving toward replacement theology that don't mean it like it originally meant. Same thing with dispensationalism. Dispensationalism came out of a Calvinistic camp. They were fatalistic. They didn't believe in free will. But the post-millennial view is we're going to make the world better, and then Jesus will show up. And so it's like, bing, terror alert. Jerusalem is under attack if we don't defend her. Oh, no, we can't let them do this. Oh, boy, we better go do that. And it gets Christians all hyped up and worried about what's going on in earthly Jerusalem. And frankly, they need to worry about the souls that are in their own city. And they need to worry about the corruption in our American government more than we need to worry about what's going on in Jerusalem. And it's this hype. And it gives people a false hope and a false goal, and they quote scriptures wrong. I want to take a question real quick. This young lady on our channel here, Lisa Daughtry, do you too believe we are at the end? What would you say, Pastor McMurtry?
Well, I believe we're in the last days, but I believe we've been in the last days for a long time. And, and if I may use that question to kind of take this opportunity to briefly speak of something. This is something else I want to cover pretty soon. But in your full preterist world, they love to bring up all of these passages about I forgot how they put it exactly, but about like the time periods, like I come quickly, shortly come to pass, all of that stuff. I think it's very clear what Jesus is talking about, what the Bible is talking about when it uses those terms. I especially think that's the case too when we look at the prophecies of Daniel. In the prophecies of Daniel in chapter 2, he makes something very clear about how that prophecy of the image of Nebuchadnezzar, we see the term times and seasons, and basically that is in reference to God raising up and taking down global kingdoms. That's clearly what that is about. And so I do believe that there is a final global kingdom that is going to come, that God is going to judge, and that's going to be his way of judging the world. He is going to defeat that final kingdom. Now, interestingly enough, since the Roman Empire, we've not had a global kingdom. I mean, and that's really pretty amazing when you stop and think about it, that, just from the time God gave Daniel that prophecy, you had the Babylonians, you had the Medes and Persians, you had the Greeks, and then you had the Roman Empire. Since then, we've not had a global kingdom. But I believe that when the Bible is referencing all those things, we're always focused on the rapture and the stuff that applies to us, and that's fine. But ultimately, I think what we're seeing prophetically is we are seeing in the book of Revelation the rise and fall of that final kingdom. That final kingdom is not going to last very long at all. And I think that's what it's that once those final prophecies kick off, it is going to happen shortly. It is going to quickly come to pass. And I think that is very clear in the scriptures. Now, here's what is a mystery.
Right.
And that's why Jesus, too, people get confused and they look at the Olivet Discourse. Well, when is he talking about the first century? And he switches to the end. Well, you almost can't tell because the fact Jesus says something very important in there. No man knows the day or the hour, neither the Son. And so when it comes to this period of time we're living in, I do believe that we have been, and this is probably a terrible way to put it, but we've been on kind of a prophetic pause for the most part for the last 2,000 years because God wants people to get saved. Once the clock starts ticking on things, everything is going to happen very fast. So, yes, we are in the last times, but don't mistake the last times for the final prophecies, the final 3.5 or 7 years or anything like that. We have no idea when the clock is going to start ticking on that. But when it does happen, it's all going to happen fast. And it's going to be a crazy time. So I do believe we're in the last days. I believe at any point the clock will start ticking on those things and we will have a very short time left. But I don't believe that final 7 years has started though.
Amen. Yeah, I believe that we'll have a final new world order, if you will, that will come up. And let me just do this. I want to share this. This is a timeline I put together because I'm a visual person and I need it to better understand it for myself. And so that's what this started as. And you can get it. I just put it in the chat room there, lawoflibertybaptist.com, trib.jpg. And with that, I just want to, and I don't mind getting your opinion. I know we may differ slightly on certain things. And let me put this full screen if I can, if it'll let me here. And let's just zoom in. So I believe that there is sort of a new world order now, but I do also believe you're right that it's not a clear-cut world government as used to exist previously. We have the United Nations. We have the World Bank. We know they're looking for a big global reset. Those things are in motion, but they have not completely happened yet. And so one of the first things I put on my chart was there is a new world order coming through here. And then that first sign that we're given is the Antichrist. Do you agree with that? That this is the indicator?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's the false Christ, the false Messiah. If we're that close, then he's probably somebody that exists today that people know, but perhaps they don't know that he is who the Judaism will receive as the Messiah.
Well, something my dad always said, and I agree with this. My dad believes Satan's always had a guy ready because he doesn't know the time either. And but again, we're seeing there is a new world order system that they're trying to do. Things like the United Nations, all these for sure are steps towards that. But that's ultimately because Satan has been trying. Satan's been trying nonstop for this stuff to happen. And so, yeah, we're going to continue seeing certain things fall into place, but it's not going to be until God gives them the green light. And I believe, I believe that's how it's going to kick off with. There will be that individual that will finally start having his way, the Antichrist, and making these things come to pass.
Amen. So the Antichrist, then we'll see a world war, a famine, the death of 25%. We're not going to miss that. 25% of the population of the earth are going to die. This is a sign that will be undeniable. Then we get into the time where the Antichrist will stand in that temple proclaiming to be God, his 666, perhaps, and I believe it's related to the sacrifice. I think it's possible he may show up and I like to say like a good cop, bad cop, and say, now listen, the new world order has been bad to you, but I'll be good. And he'll show up and he'll say, you have to stop the sacrifice. That's blasphemous because I am the Christ, as he begins to take these titles and prove it to the world, through lying signs and wonders. He will try to prove that he is the Messiah. And, he wants the world to think that he is the son of David, the son of Abraham, the son of Joseph. They're going to use all these terms and pseudo fulfillments. And then, of course, after that, we have the return of the Lord at the coming of the Lord, and then God will begin to pour out his wrath. Generally speaking, do you agree with that timeline?
Yes, I mean that. In my opinion, I think that's how things are going to play out. I don't. Uh, while the seals don't have any timeline associated with them, um, I can't find any consistent evidence of that happening throughout history or anything like that. I definitely don't think it happened in the first century.
Right.
Because I strongly hold to a late date too of the writing of Revelation. And yeah, and there's nothing that resembles all those things happening in the first century anyway. But
We
in
had
my opinion, I do think it's going to play out like that.
Well, now tell me about that. The date of revelation. This is very important. Your
Mhm.
opinion on that can actually change how you see a lot of prophecy. Um, most well, historically, most accurately, from all I can tell, I believe it looks like it was written about 95. But then you
Mhm.
have this resurgent, and was it influenced by Catholics? Would be my main question. That it was written in 70 AD, or what? What? Tell us about that dispute, if you will.
Yeah, so I did in fact I did a big study on that a while back where um I looked a lot into Irenaeus's writings because I was reading all the different sources people were using to go with the late date. And everybody like Fox's Book of Martyrs quotes Irenaeus, Eusebius, quotes everybody quoted Irenaeus. So when you read Irenaeus, it is unmistakable that it was written after 90 some AD. I understand that's not inspired writing. Preterists like to talk about the internal evidence, and that's another great conversation where I don't think they have a leg to stand on. But historically, there's just no evidence for the early dating whatsoever. Now, I am in the process of reading through the book. There's a book by Kenneth Gentry. I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head. Everyone refers to that. Everyone that I have come across who is an early date proponent all reference Kenneth Gentry's book. Now, I'm not through it yet, but I am reading that book as objectively as I possibly can, and I'm telling you, so far it is very underwhelming what he is presenting. It does not work at all. And
You
it's
think they have a
mostly based.
presupposition? You think they're coming to it with that attitude? That couldn't be true.
Absolutely.
Therefore, I need evidence to prove what I already believe.
Right. So it's like, let's just admit it. Us as biblicists, if we read something historically that contradicts the Bible, we're going to believe the Bible over history.
Amen.
Well, they feel the same way. And they feel that the internal evidence supports it being written before 70 AD. Okay, we can have a conversation about that. The problem is, though, whenever they look at history, they are trying to they're trying to correct history um based on their interpretation of the scriptures. Like, well, this is probably what they meant. You can take, there's one statement, I don't have it in front of me. There's the most famous statement that everyone refer to, where from Irenaeus, where he's showing it being written during the reign of Domitian. Everybody is always taking that one statement and saying that could be translated this way. He could have meant this. And they're always telling you all the ways it could have been translated, kind of like they do with the text of the Bible. Well, here's the thing about that. I get it. History is not inspired writing, but that's not the only evidence. If you read, I mean, I read a bunch of Irenaeus's writings. And so it's like, well, okay, maybe that was a mistaken translation there, but are you saying that was a mistaken translation over here and a mistaken translation over here? The way we are interpreting that phrase that he said right there is consistent with everything that you read from Irenaeus. He made other references to John and Domitian and a lot of these different things. And so it's a desperately weak argument. And so basically what I would just like for um, the early date people to admit is they have zero historical evidence, and that history does in fact contradict. And again, Bible trumps history. But the simple fact is there is no historical evidence for the early date. Now, some people too, they've used some stuff. Gentry, he pulled some stuff from history and some of the cities that are referenced in Revelation, but that stuff was so weak. It's not even worth looking into. I mean, his arguments that he gave, but most of it's the internal evidence, and it's not there. They're just wrong. Especially, they really love the 7 kings. 5 are fallen and 1 is. They're just interpreting that whole thing wrong, and they're interpreting that completely inconsistent with prophecy in Daniel, for example. In Daniel, when it talks about the kings, when you go to the first prophetic prophecy in Daniel, or chapter in Daniel, chapter 2, you have the head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar, he said, "You are that head of gold." Okay, he was that king. But then when you get to the Medes and Persians, okay, that wasn't about an individual. It was about another kingdom. Because after Nebuchadnezzar, you had evil Merodach, you had Belshazzar, and I think maybe one other one over that time period. And so there were other kings in between the different kingdoms, but yet they were referred to as kings. So that's something the Bible does sometimes. When it references kings, it's referenced to kingdoms. In Revelation, when it talks about the 7 mountains, okay, those 7 mountains, those represent 7 kingdoms, not 7 kings. It's 7 global kingdoms. And when it says 5 are fallen and 1 is, because 5 global kingdoms had fallen and 1 was still in power during that time, and it was the Roman Empire.
So I preached about that on the previous Wednesday. Actually, we had Pastor DeVries last Wednesday. Prior to that, I was in Revelation 17, and the city on 7 hills, right, is what you commonly hear. Well, that's Rome. Clearly, it's got to be Rome. Well, Jerusalem is on 7 hills also, and there's like 30 or 40 major cities around the world on 7 hills. But the indication of the spiritual kingdoms is obviously how the Bible's interpreting that, and people, they just have it stuck in their mind. It has to be Rome, not discerning that actually came from Rome and from Protestants. It didn't come from your Bible believers through the ages. They always saw that it would be a literal Antichrist sitting in a literal temple that would be apostasy. If I start sacrificing a lamb for salvation, you're going to call me a heretic. But yet we've got Christians that are somehow supporting these groups that pay for that. And it just blows my mind.
Yeah. No, and at the end of the day, if Revelation is written after 70 AD, predators have nothing. I mean, how in the world are you going to claim everything in Revelation is about the destruction of it's prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem when it was written 25 years after the destruction of Jerusalem? They have absolutely nothing. Now, here's the thing. Even if it's written before 70 AD, it still doesn't prove everything they preach is right. But if it's written after, it, right there definitely proves them wrong. And so they can't have that. And all the internal evidence, that is something I want to do in the near future. I've just gotten sidetracked. I need to finish that book. I want to finish the book. I want to hear out Gentry. I might even have him on the podcast. And I like to, talk to him about some of these things, but I mean, so far I am very underwhelmed, but I feel like while I am convinced that Revelation was written after 70 AD, I always tell people, hey, I'm willing to change on anything if you show me the evidence. And I feel like this Gentry book is like the final thing I need to look into, because everyone who says it's not, or it is written before 70 AD, they're all going to him. So he's the source. So, I'm checking. I like to check the source. And
Amen.
Box of Book of Martyrs.
Be a Berean, right?
Yeah,
Prove
all those things. They led me to Irenaeus. And
now
Irenaeus's writings is crystal clear. It was in 95 AD. And
Irenaeus again proves a historic premillennial, that there will be tribulation before the return of Christ. But there are many fundamentalists that are attaching to another section of Irenaeus taking it out of context to say, see, that's a pre-trib. We'll be out of here before anything goes wrong. Support Israel. They're God's people. And it's like the Zionistic dispensational fundamentalists, their eyes are blinded in part until the Antichrist comes in. Then they're going to say, "Oh no, I was wrong. That's the
Mhm.
Antichrist. I thought I was supposed to be out of here."
Right.
What was the role of the Rothschilds in this whole process?
Well, I mean, I think they were obviously big funders of these things for sure. You know, they had big money, they had a lot of political influence. You know, they were behind the whole Balfour Declaration that kind of got a lot of these things started. And one thing that you know, I don't want to speculate because I don't want to just because it is speculation. I don't want to freak people out, but I don't want to look like a conspiracy theorist, but it is horrifying when you look into the amount of influence a lot of these high up Jews have had in our political system. And I mean, the reality is too, they even got the guys like J. Frank Norris, who was a big supporter and promoter of Zionism. They have helped fund, things like the Schofield Bible. When you see the pressure they put on political leaders, and now, and the thing you get called a conspiracy theory when you say this stuff, but APAC, okay, APAC's not a conspiracy theory. Okay, the American Israeli what is that? American Israeli Political Alliance Committee. They are powerful. Go watch Thomas Massey's interview that everybody hated with Tucker Carlson, where he talks about all the congressmen having their own basically APAC babysitter. We just saw one of the squad just lost her seat. I mean, the squad, those members in the squad are pretty popular. They're from very liberal districts where it's easy for them to get elected because they're so liberal. But notice I forgot her name, the one that just
Oh,
got voted out.
yeah, where there was the most expensive race to history to date, where she got
Yes,
kicked because she spoke up against the Israel war.
right. And she didn't get defeated by a Republican. She got beat in a primary
She was the
by
incumbent.
another Democrat, by an APAC funded Democrat. They fund Democrats and Republicans. And basically, there are APAC's not stupid. There are some areas where they are not going to get a Republican elected. And so typically, in these real liberal areas, it's easy for like the AOCs and people like that to get elected. But what they end up doing is they end up just putting up another Democrat against them, and they don't care how liberal they are. They don't care what they do to America, but they better support Israel. Yeah, Cori Bush, she lost, and it was all because of APAC money. The amount of money that they spend to in these elections to influence elections, they are very powerful. And while APAC, I don't know how long they've been around, a lot of these Jewish influence groups, they've been doing this kind of thing, for the last 150 years. And we shouldn't be shocked. We shouldn't be shocked by it at all. And this confuses people so much because, you Fox News Baptists, bless your hearts, but you see those anti-Semitic AOCs and Cori Bushes and Omar, whatever her name, that Omar lady. You see all that, and they're always standing against Israel. And so you being a well-trained Fox News Baptist, you always have to take the opposite position of people like that. But the reality is, they sometimes even those crazy liberals, there's some things they understand is wrong, and what is going on in Israel is in fact wrong. And obviously what they hate about it, their motivations are different than people like myself. But either way, our country is so bought off. Our political leaders are so bought off by Israel It is absolutely astounding. It's amazing that people can have dual citizenship, and they don't have to renounce that to be in leadership in America, but you do over in Israel. You'd have to renounce your American citizenship and all that.
And renounce Jesus as the
Exactly.
Christ. You
Yes.
absolutely have to. And,
And
we had this titles of nobility. We didn't want outside foreign influences in our government, but it is here. There's nothing you can do about it. We have all these political action committees that raise the money, and they're the influencers. They're paying these people well to favor them when it comes to passing bills. And so what are we doing? We're sending billions of dollars all around the world, not just for war, but for abortion and all sorts of other political change. And now America has become a propaganda machine with our money. And it's not even money, it's our debt. We're promising our
Mhm.
children will pay it so we can go start a war somewhere else. And we're making enemies. And it really is sad what we've come to. And APAC, it's, you say, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. Well, let's do this. Let's not be a conspiracy denier. Okay. We can be a conspiracy realist that
Mhm.
two or more have gathered together in private to work against others for harm. And it is affecting our country. It may even start a civil war in our country, those that are for Israel versus for Palestine. I'm not for it, either one politically. They both need to be saved. And so I mean, there was a letter back in the day between Giuseppe Mazzini and Albert Pike about establishing this Mohammedanism versus Zionism and using it to dismantle religion so they can introduce the pure doctrines of Lucifer. And whether, I think that's the agenda. How can we establish the Antichrist? Well, let's defeat religion by making people sick of it. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to destroy the people of Jerusalem, whether you like them or not.
Mhm.
On both sides, they're all going to be wiped out. They're going to be killed. Their souls are lost. And any Christian that is politically supporting Zionism, there's blood on your hands. I hate to say it, but we need to wake up to this, and we need to wake up the pastors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do. Yeah, the people in Israel, they don't want this stuff. They don't like it. They're not for it. So I was just asked, which Jews are you supporting? Which Israel are you supporting? And the
Right.
reality is, bless your hearts again, you Fox News Baptists. And I know you're never going to admit that that's what you are. But when you are supporting Israel, you are actually standing with Netanyahu. That's the part of Israel you support. A majority of his country does not like him. They want to get rid of him. You think you're standing with those Orthodox Jews praying at the Wailing Wall. They are not with you. They don't want Netanyahu. They're not pushing Zionism. You are actually, when most Baptists say I stand with Israel, they are actually standing with Zionism. That's what
Right.
they're standing with. Now, most Baptists won't call themselves Zionists. Some will, but a lot of them won't. I didn't even know what the term Zionism was until I watched Marching to Zion. When that came out, I had not long before that, I had changed my position on Israel, but I never called myself a Zionist. I wasn't even familiar with that term, but I definitely would have qualified as one. I had the stand with Israel mentality, which actually meant Netanyahu. And so, just think about how offended we would be as independent fundamental Baptists, right winger, conservative, or whatever, if, some person from China came over to us and they're like, hey, we love you guys. We stand with you. And, we show our support by, waving a Democrat flag and, holding up a Kamala Harris sign. It's just like, we're going to be offended by that. Like,
Right.
you don't stand with us. We're against her. Well, when Americans go around with there's, I stand with Israel attitude. No, they're standing with Netanyahu. You just offended a lot of Jews, a lot of Israel. You just offended them by that. So just admit that you're standing with a political party. You're standing in another country, and it's one that is not religious. It's one that is, one that has a ton of blood on his
Yeah.
hands,
Yeah.
a ton of blood. And think about this. God wouldn't let David build the temple because of all the blood that he had shed. If God was behind any of this temple stuff, you think he's going to let
Wow.
Netanyahu build it. You know,
Yeah.
there's absolutely no way. But either way, I don't think Netanyahu really gives a rip about building the temple. However, if Netanyahu were to build the temple, or to get behind the rebuilding of the temple, I believe it would be because he knows that would be such a massive thing for Israel, and it would get people looking at them, recognizing them as the authority, and probably even getting a lot of people to move over there. But at the end of the day, he doesn't really care about that stuff. He would advance the rebuilding of the temple if he felt it would be a positive for his political ideology.
Well, and I think the main problem is your Fox News Baptists, which they bought this half Catholic doctrine, half Zionist doctrine whenever they watch Fox News. They're deceived in their end times philosophy, their salvation doctrine. It can be affected by this. I mean, salvation's by faith alone in the Lord Jesus Christ. We have a Jesus centered prophecy view. There is a future to come. Those that do not see Jesus in all prophecy, those that want to either read themselves into it, whatever's happening today, or those that now are focusing on Israel and Israel focused prophecy. This is the problem. And wouldn't you agree that, I mean, was it perhaps Pastor McMurtry back in the day, you had more of an Israel focused view of prophecy, seeing this nation to come as the fulfillment? And when you recognize, is that where you were before you changed?
Yeah, and people don't like when you say that, they take offense to that, and I understand that. But here's the thing: go to any pre-trib conference, go to any pro-Israel conference, and I promise you, you will hear more headlines read than scriptures read. You will hear more talk about what's happening over in Israel right now on October 7th and Netanyahu. You're going to hear more talk about that than you are going to hear expounding on the scriptures. That is a fact. And it is nauseating. And so, again, I had, a Pastor Wamper on my program a while back, and, he takes issue with that. And I understand what he's saying. I get that. And maybe it's not completely fair. That's not what they're trying to do. But in reality, that is kind of what's happening. And I don't believe guys like Pastor Wamper who do this, if he was preaching at a prophecy conference, I think he knows better, even though he disagrees with us on some things. But just go to any pre-trib prophecy conference and just keep track of scriptures read and headlines read. The apostles referred to, or news sources and politicians referred to. It's so Israel centric. It's absolutely nauseating. And then it always comes down to, we got to stand with them. We've got to, and they
Brother,
prophesy.
I was just at a major conference, a very fundamental King James Bible. They have a lot of things right, especially salvation and actually going out and soul winning. A lot of good guys there. And I got my family, we got up and left at this one point. This guy was praising thermonuclear war. Praise God for nuclear weapons, amen. And I mean, just praising, like, if we don't stand with Israel, and I'm thinking, then what? Like, if the modern day nation of Israel was God's people, well, God doesn't need America to defend them. God will defend it, right? And they're so mixed up. It just infuriates me that Christians, my people, are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, and they're getting all their philosophy from Fox News. They're getting their doctrine from a Scofield reference Bible, which he was a heretic. He was a horrible person. There's several guys that helped edit the Scofield Bible and contributed to the footnotes in other sections. And when they saw the finished product, they were publicly preaching against Scofield and his newfound pre-trib rapture and Zionism, because they said, I didn't know I was part of that. I was just helping in other sections. And so many of the names inside the Scofield, they reject Scofield. Scofield was a heretic. He didn't even want to use a King James Bible. He wanted to use the Catholic Bible that's missing doctrine. These are all really, really big deals. Now, I want to share this again. This is Pastor Tommy McMurtry, the Spirit of Prophecy, and he's simulcasting right now. He's had several really good things on his podcast. And of course, there's the film coming out from Paul Wittenberger, excellent filmmaker. Everything he does a great job on. And so this film, A City Lost, dealing with the temple, is coming out soon. And so I'm excited to see more on that. And any final thoughts, Pastor McMurtry, before we land the plane here for today?
Yeah, no, yeah, but definitely be watching for that documentary. I don't know if I'm supposed to give some specifics on, but it does look like there's a pretty major film studio that's planning on using the film, distributing it. I don't understand that world and how all that stuff works, but I was told we had a premiere for a prequel to the documentary that is so good. I wish this was on the internet, but he might need to wait because it's very controversial. But Brother Paul, he made a short, about a 20 or 30-minute video called The Eye of the Storm, basically showing a lot of the activity surrounding the Temple Mount just since the 6-Day War in 1967. And it's intense stuff. It's there's some pretty violent images and things on there from a lot of the things that have recently happened. But it's one of those things it is very controversial. We don't want to like sabotage the the temple documentary, which A City Lost, it's not controversial, but it is controversial. If you watch it, you're not going to know that it's controversial. But it is because, when you question tradition, they freak out about it. And if you ask a lot of Jews over there about the possibility of the temple being in the city of David, they get very offended even by the question. And I think it's just because they know this is just that's a dumb tradition. But yeah, in their world, tradition trumps everything. But yeah, be praying for that documentary. I think something's supposed to be happening really soon with that. I know.
Okay.
I think it was right around this time. The sound's supposed to be getting finished up.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, be praying for it and that it really gets out there in a big way. I think
Well,
you can have.
let's do this.
Impact.
Let me just have you back here in the near future as it gets closer. Let's get as much exposure and people, put it on their radar. And also, I'm going to just say, on the Law of Liberty channel, I've got several different podcasts. There we are simulcasting now. I've been doing several different topics on this, especially heavily on prophecy, the King James Bible, salvation by faith alone. And on this podcast coming up tomorrow, I do have a special guest, and I don't know if it'll let me show it here. No, this is a pastor that actually stormed a Masonic lodge.
Oh yeah.
And has Catholic Jesuits printing literature against his church in his region because his soul winners have been putting out literature about, problems with Catholicism and other things. So that's going to be a fascinating interview. That will be tomorrow. So be back here on the Law of Liberty channel for that interview tomorrow. And again, if you're not subscribed to the Spirit of Prophecy, check it out. He's got some pretty good stuff. Pastor McMurtry, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I do appreciate the stand that you're taking for the things that are right. The King James Bible, once saved, always saved, Zionism, and some of these conversations need to happen. Thank you for standing against preterism, that everything has already been fulfilled, and looking forward to just have you back on sometime soon. So thanks for everybody that tuned in today. I hope this really has been a blessing and an eye-opener, and God bless. We'll see you soon.
So speak ye, and so do, as they that shall be judged